Today I'm going to talk about codes in relation to tiny houses. First, I want to tell you by what authority I have to talk about this. I've been working in the field of architecture and interior design now for over 20 years. When I decided to build my tiny house, I had a lot of knowledge behind how to build tiny houses, and I knew what the codes were. I realized that I wanted to do a tiny house on wheels because I wanted to avoid the codes. When you build a tiny house on wheels, you don't have to worry about the building codes anymore because the tiny house on wheels falls under the restrictions of DMV rules and regulations. And so it no longer follows the building code because it has a license plate on it. So there are two types of tiny houses, one on a foundation and one on wheels. So the tiny houses on foundations have to go by the rules and regulations in the code books. And those code books are International Residential Code. There are also other codes that have to do with your local area, but the basic main codes to follow are the International Residential Code. The reason why building codes are the way they are and have the restrictions that they do is because in the turn of the century, when people were cramming into large cities, the landlords were not providing adequate living situations for the tenants. So they would squeeze them into rooms that did not have any facilities at all. They wouldn't have a bathroom maybe, or maybe the room was too small, and they would just try to squeeze as many people in as they possibly could. I'm not saying they still don't do this, but they're definitely trying to fit everybody in back then in a tiny little space, and it was miserable and horrible and not healthy. However, now they are a hindrance to tiny houses today. And another thing that we have to deal with, if you have a building, a dwelling unit that is separate from a main house and shares a kitchen and a bathroom and such, that one is called an accessory dwelling unit. And it could also be called an in-laws apartment. And those are allowed in some areas. You will have to check with your local code to find out what is allowed where. The main issues that tiny houses have with codes are this: size requirements. So the size requirements for the International Residential Code are a dwelling space not less than 7 feet in the narrowest dimension and not less than 70 square feet total. So you can't have a bedroom less than 70 square feet. So that's 7 by 10 feet at the minimum. Ceiling heights cannot be less than 7 feet. This knocks out lofts of all sorts. If a loft has a ceiling less than 7 feet, then it isn't allowed. Another thing that is required for residential is having an egress window. And that egress window is for fire emergencies. It is required for each bedroom. And not only that, but you must have a certain percentage of glazing for each bedroom, depending on the square footage of the space. The window requirements is an opening that opens no less than 20 inches by 24 inches. When specifying windows for projects, I've noticed that the egress windows are indicated in the books for that manufacturer. These codes may be reviewed online for free, and the one relating to egress windows in particular is R310. The other thing that is required for homes is for them to have a bathroom, which is a toilet, a sink, and a shower or a bath. And sometimes I'm not entirely sure how this relates to the accessory dwelling unit that I was mentioning earlier. And the only other thing I want to mention is that with tiny houses on wheels, you're supposed to register them as an RV. So they will have to be weighed and a license plate put on them. I had a license plate with my trailer before I moved it to this location, and I literally finished it the day before, and I drove it to this location, and that is where it has been ever since. I've never moved it to get it weighed to get an RV certification for mine. So, do you have to? Probably not, but I would do it because you're not going to get in trouble if you get pulled over, because it has to be registered and inspected if you're driving your house around the country. In another video, I'm going to talk about where you might be able to park your tiny house. Another thing that tiny houses have to deal with is the codes relating to zoning. So a zoning would be an area in which you were allowed to put the house. Not all zoning areas are the same. You have zoning for businesses and you have zoning for residential. But not all residential would allow a tiny house to be put in the area or even in a backyard, especially in housing association areas. If you have had to deal with codes in your area at all for your tiny house, I'd like to know about it. So please let me know how it went for you in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.